Hi, everybody. I'm Rita McGrath, and I am here with Zeynep Ton, a good friend, the author of a fantastic book called The Good Job Strategy. And Zeynep, look how on brand I am, huh?
I love that.
Got the colors going and everything. So for those of you that don't know Zeynep, she is a professor at MIT. She's done a ton of work. And what I think is sort of one of the most interesting things about Zeynep is she's actually an operations professor. She didn't come from the world of, human resources or anything like that, and yet got really fascinated by the whole question of what makes a good job and why are bad jobs so prevalent and so forth. But coming at it from an operations angle, I think really gives it a very different sort of angle. Couple of quick housekeeping notes. This is being recorded. Do not say anything you do not want recorded for posterity, or write anything in the chat that you don't want recorded for posterity. And we'll take about an hour and a free-flowing conversation. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. We do have a moderator who will boot you out if you behave badly. So we hopefully won't have to deal with that. So without further ado, welcome, Zeynep. I'm so pleased you were able to make an hour to come join us.
I'm delighted to be here, Rita. Thank you.
Great. So perhaps just start off with your own research, how you got going, how you got onto this whole topic of jobs, because I think it really is interesting given your background and where you came from, that's where you landed.
Yeah, so my background, as you said, is operations. And I started my career looking at retail supply chains 20 years ago. And in the retail supply chains, we are obsessed with inventory management and getting the right product to the right place at the right time profitably. And early on in my research, one of the things that I found with a group of researchers actually is that while retailers did so much in the back end of their supply chains, when the products came to the stores, they dropped the ball. So stores were full of operational problems. Products were not where they were supposed to be. Inventory data were inaccurate. Lots of plans were not executed, and retailers were losing a ton of money as a result of these problems. And so I studied these problems, their effect on profitability and sales, and I saw, wow, these problems are big, they're everywhere. Why do they happen all the time? And when I looked into that, I saw the answer in bad jobs. Part of the answer in bad jobs. Stores that had more employee turnover had more problems. Stores that had less training had more problems. Stores that were understaffed had more problems. And when I found this out, I was introduced to this huge bad jobs problem in the United States. I came from Turkey, and I saw the United States as a land of opportunity. And it has been a land of opportunity for me. Personally, I came here on a volleyball scholarship and things worked out great. But through my research, I started meeting people, a lot of people who were working hard, who were very competent, but they were just not making it. And when you look at the United States now, the problem is quite devastating. Brookings just came up with a wonderful report where they show that 53 million of workers in the United States, 53 million workers are low-wage workers. And low wage and the median wage is $17,000 and $950.
Whoa.
It's 53 million. And when you look at the service sector, so retail is what I was studying, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2018, there were 42 million people who were working in these low-wage jobs. And these jobs are not just low wages, but also very unstable schedules. So you can get your schedule 1 or 2 weeks in advance, and then it can even change in the last minute. You are given very few hours to be able to make a decent living. And apart from low wages and unstable schedules, I saw that retailers were treating their employees as interchangeable parts. Mm-hmm. They were given no decision rights, they weren't empowered. And one retail worker summed it up so well. She said, "We are throwaways who are a dime a dozen, just human robots." So this bad jobs problems, what was fascinating to me was it was driving a lot of poor performance in the companies. So what my research showed was that these bad jobs are not really necessary. They are a choice that companies are making. And there's a much better choice, which is good jobs. And this is not just a theory, because even in low-cost retail, what I found was that there's a group of companies who are able to pay their workers high wages, provide them stable schedules, meaning and dignity in their work, and offer just as low wages as the bad jobs retailers and make just as much money as the bad jobs retailers. So the one I think I came at it from the operations angle, but what I came out with it was that bad jobs are a choice and there's a much better way to run a business.
I think that's really inspiring. So the prevailing myth, right, that we read about all the time is that, oh, well, we couldn't possibly pay people better. I mean, you hear it every time the minimum wage debate comes up, or people talk about having, living wages, a big discussion there. And you saw the controversy when, for example, Aetna, when their CEO had a revelation. I don't know if you're familiar with that case.
Yeah, $15 an hour. Yep.
Oh, and I mean, but all his peers, all the CEO peers were like, how can you do that? You're going to drive your business into the ground and so forth. Yeah. And he felt, this was Mark Bertolini, who felt very strongly that, if my own workers can't afford my product, then what am I doing? And I think what they found after they implemented this much more rewarding kind of job structure is their performance actually went up. Their turnover went down, their customer service scores went up, their retention improved, all these different measures really went up, and it actually paid for itself, that they said. So why do you think this myth is so pervasive, that we have to pay people badly and treat them like Kleenex in order to run a productive enterprise?
We just have a new paper that just got published in Organization Science.
Oh, congratulations.
And what we find is that you can maximize profits through a good job strategy, or you could maximize profits through a bad job strategy. The bad jobs is much easier to do.
Okay.
Good jobs requires a system. You have to have the parts together. And the bad jobs is a simpler strategy to execute. And it doesn't rely on workers. And I think this is a key thing about why the bad jobs is so pervasive. And we can get into lots of other causes, but I think one of the reasons is leaders' assumptions about workers and what workers are capable of doing. I think we have been so out of touch with real people and what they're experiencing that we think, well, maybe they're very simple. Maybe if I empower them, it's not going to work. Maybe if I do this, it's not going to work. So I think leaders' assumptions about workers get in the way sometimes. But fundamentally, it's a harder strategy to execute. It requires courage, commitment, long-term view from leaders. And I think we have a courage and commitment and competence deficit.
So tell me a little bit about these CEOs. You had a piece, I think it was in the Harvard Business Review a little while ago, about how CEOs don't really understand how horrible the jobs are that they're providing. So I think that's very telling, that they don't even know they're offering bad jobs.
Yeah, and just to compare, Rita, so the median wage of a retail worker is $11.30, salesperson.
Wow.
Costco, which is a low-cost provider, the average wage of a Costco hourly worker in the United States is slightly $23 an hour. So look at the difference. One might say, well, Costco is a warehouse club and they can do things that others can't do. So let's look at another retailer, Quick Trip. It's a convenience store chain with gas stations. And they're based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. If you were to apply right now to their Tulsa location, your starting annual package for a full-timer would be around $42,000 a year. This is close to a middle-class type of wage. So here I see companies that are in the low-cost retail environment paying their workers really well, and then the median wage is $11 an hour. So now I'll go back to your question. So a couple months ago, I was moderating a panel in Washington, D.C. with a couple of CEOs. And I asked the question, why are bad jobs common? And what is it going to take for more CEOs to pay their workers more, to invest in them like Bertolini did? And when there is a clear moral case for it, there's a clear competitive case for it, and there's a clear financial case for it. And we can get into either moral, competitive, and financial later. Why is that? And then these CEOs said to me, well, companies are investing in their workers. CEOs are investing in workers. And I said, maybe not enough of them are. there are some CEOs who are doing it. And then they kept giving examples. No, they are. And then afterward, I started thinking, they really believed what they were saying. I mean, to my surprise. And I realized, of course they believe it, because when CEOs think about, am I offering a good job? They benchmark themselves against other competitors who are offering just as bad jobs, right? So if I'm Starbucks, or if I'm Dunkin' Donuts, or whichever company, I say, well, I'm giving $12 an hour, but that's the market wage. So I feel good about it. The other reason why they convince themselves is that they look at the wrong metrics. So we work with several companies where you provide employee surveys, and like, are you proud to work here? Can you express yourself? And then people come out and say, wow, people are really proud to work here. And then I look at them and I say, yes, but we have 80% employee turnover. So they convince themselves through those surveys that they are offering, good jobs, but in reality, their turnover is very high. Why? Because they don't pay workers high enough. Why? Because they don't offer stable schedules. Why? Because there is not a career path. So they look at whatever metric makes them happy, right, and makes them believe that they are in fact offering good jobs. And the other common thing that we have seen is that they tend to conflate culture with good jobs. They say, well, our employees can come to work with their tattoos, they can wear whatever they want to, they can express themselves, we have a really nice culture, and therefore we must be doing everything that we can for our workers, but no, you're not paying them enough. You're not offering. So I think they look at the wrong things and they benchmark themselves against the wrong companies. Instead of saying, hey, Costco is paying $23 an hour, how can we get there? But I'll give you a nice story too. Last year, I can't name the company, and one day I hope that I will name this company, outside retailer, outside the retail space. The CEO of this huge company reached out to me, and he said, I truly believe that America needs good jobs and higher paying jobs. And we started engaging in a conversation, and he said, but just some jobs just don't contribute enough. And this person had lots of call center workers, and he was talking about, the call center workers, it's just, you don't contribute enough. And I said, would you say that a retail job is one of those jobs where, people can't contribute enough? And he said, yes. And I said, well, Costco pays $23 an hour. And his eyes opened up, and he sent an email to his group saying, how can we design our jobs so that our employees can contribute $23 an hour? There's also that way of looking at it, because people's contribution is not fixed. It's not that Zeynep goes into a job and Zeynep can only produce $12 an hour of wage. No, the design of the job enables Zeynep or Rita or whoever to either contribute a lot or contribute little, to be productive or not to be productive. And I think sometimes we miss that, how much job design can affect the productivity and contribution of people. And that is the part of the good job strategy that is very operations driven. Yeah. Right? It's not just about investing in workers, but you have to design the job so that employees can be super productive, so that they can contribute a lot, so that they can continuously improve your processes, your services, and your products.
So one of the things we talked about, this was going back a couple of years now, and we were talking to Jeff Pfeffer, you remember? And he's going to be part of the Fireside chat.
Oh, wonderful!
In a couple of weeks, yeah. And of course, he wrote a book called "Dying for a Paycheck," which touches on some similar themes. But what was interesting about the conversation with Jeff was he said, this has been extensively studied, that there is absolutely no empirical question that if you provide decent pay, cross-training, that what it does is it influences the revenue side of things, right? And I think this is one of the most interesting things to me, which is when CEOs look at their payroll, and any large company, right, big payroll, they can immediately see the cost side impact of offering better pay and better working conditions. What they don't see is the revenue impact. And so I think it was some years ago, you were writing about IKEA and the closet unit in IKEA. and I'll just retell the story because it's a long time ago now. But they had this unit. It was like sort of California Closets on the cheap, right? And it was really an underperforming part of the store, and they were actually considering shutting it down. And then a bunch of sort of their corporate anthropologists went and spent a couple of days watching customer behavior in that part of the store. And what they realized is people were coming in intending to buy, and come and just like in this sea. I mean, do you come in with the right measurements for your closet, and how many hats do you have, and what the design? I mean, I don't know. You don't know. And what they experimented with was they took a couple of skilled designers and had them working in that unit. And when a customer came in, they would walk them through the whole process of design and how that would work. And sales took off, just absolutely skyrocketed, because what they'd done was they'd taken the employee, and instead of saying, here's an interchangeable part employee, they said, here's someone with human expertise and empathy who can actually help you figure this out, right? And that gave people the confidence and the willingness to spend. And I find it very interesting now, if you go into New York and look at the IKEA design stores, that their entire stores, where you don't really actually buy anything, they're full of designers who can help you take your 600 square foot apartment and turn it into a comfortable living space using IKEA products. And I think it's going to give them a tremendous edge.
Yeah, and the first part of that story is really so common in retail, and that's why we're seeing so many bankruptcies during the last couple of decades, and a couple of years, and more will come out. But there has been, retail is a very low margin industry, right? Many retailers make single digit profit margins. And in this low margin setting, there's an obsession with cost cutting. And what is the easiest cost to cut? It tends to be labor. So one of the things that I found, and my dissertation site was Borders.
All right.
They're not with us anymore. But in one of my papers, I found that border stores were losing so much money because they just didn't have enough staffing levels. Like if they had more payroll dollars spent on the people, they would make more money. But when you talk to managers, this is their mindset. They say, well, my compensation, part of my compensation depends on my bonus. And my bonus is payroll as a percentage of sales. When my sales go down, the first thing that I do is I cut my payroll. And then, of course, you get into that vicious cycle because you cut your payroll, you don't have enough people to get all the work done, you have lots of problems, your sales reduce, and then that reduces your labor budget, and then this vicious cycle continues. If you can change that mindset to say, look, if you invest in your workers, you could have a huge upside on the sales side. And not just sales now, but sales in the future. Because when people think about good jobs companies, Costco, it's a low-cost producer, but people love going there. Or Trader Joe's. Again, Trader Joe's, low prices, but they also have a differentiation. Quick Trip. I mean, I was amazed. This is a convenience store chain with gas stations. It's like 7-Eleven. You look at their Yelp score, it's 4.17, which doesn't say so much, but out of 5, it's 4.2 almost. 2 standard deviations above the average for all top 50 retailers in terms of size. And their customers love going there. So the reason is the stores are always clean, you get in and out fast, people are friendly, and you have that type of loyalty that brings sales not just now, but in the future. So when you look at these companies, you realize, wow, they have a big competitive advantage because they provide their customers a compelling reason to come and shop from them. And the other competitive advantage from, apart from the sales side, that would be very, similar to what you talk about, Rita, in your work too, is that they can adapt to changes so much faster. And they can see around the corners and they can see the change, what's coming out too, because they're always talking to their customers, right? They're talking to their customers and they learn about new trends from the front lines. And at the same time, when there are technology trends, other things, it's so much easier for them to execute because they have an employee base who have been there for a long time. They have, they don't turn over every few months, but they're very competent, they're very motivated, they're very capable. So it brings not just differentiation advantage from a competitive point of view, but ability to adapt faster to changes in technology or changes in customer needs.
Well, I think that's such a crucial thing. And let's go back to Trader Joe's, because I think that's an interesting example that I am told, and maybe you knew more about this, that a typical employee at Trader Joe's, the first couple of weeks that they're there, they train on every role in the store. So let's say there's a big bunch up of customers at cashier, everybody knows how to be a cashier. If there's a big shortage of things in veggies, everybody knows how to restock veggies. And it gives the entity a resilience that I think you don't have if everybody's just, I take this, I take this box and I move it from here to here, and that's all I know how to do, right? And so can you speak to the importance of sort of that knowledge base?
Yeah, and I can also talk about how, when I looked at what makes good jobs possible in low cost.
That would be great. Yeah, that would be great.
There, I found 4 operational choices that were key to making this possible. And one of them is exactly what you said, cross-training, which is, in our operations terms, it gives flexibility because you can react to customer demand. When customers are there, you attend customers at the cash register. When customers are not there, then you shall merchandise, you order merchandise, you do logistics types of tasks. What this, of course, provides is that you can provide a much better service to your customers, right? Because you are adapting to their needs. What this also provides is the ability to provide better schedules to your employees, because now you don't have to change the number of employees based on customer demand. You change what employees do. So it provides that for employees, and of course, years of research in human motivation shows that task variety is good for motivation. And from the company's perspective, this choice, cross-training, enables their employees to be always productive, even when there are no customers. Compare that, for example, to Whole Foods, which wasn't a good jobs company before Amazon bought them, which is still not a good jobs company. But Whole Foods, if you work there, you're a cashier. That's all you do. If there are no customers, you just wait for the customers, right? So you can't be productive, and therefore, Whole Foods it doesn't have that type of flexibility. So it's one operational choice that works for customers, it works for employees, and it works for the organization because it provides productivity and also resilience too. And then there are other operational choices too, but we can.
Well, you said there were 4, so the cross-training.
There are 4. Cross-training is one. The first operational choice is and this is kind of strategy and operations. They have a clear focus on what they want to provide for their customers, and they simplify their operations based on that focus. So if you go to Trader Joe's, you're not going to see 40,000 different products. You're going to see 8,000 products, right? And fewer products, what that enables is for the employee to be a lot more productive. What that enables is for the employee to be knowledgeable about the products. So now they can cross-sell to customers. You go there, you say, I'm looking for this type of jam. Well, we don't have that jam, but we carry this one, which is very similar in taste, right? You can't develop that type of knowledge if you're offering 500 types of jams in an area. So it enables the employee to contribute more to sales and be more productive, and hence Trader Joe's or Costco or Mercadona, they can pay their employees more. It enables the employee to provide better service to customer. And of course, that simplification is very effective from a cost point of view. So focus and simplify is the first operational choice. The second one is the combination of standardization and empowerment. And again, I'll contrast Whole Foods and Trader Joe's because it's probably familiar with everyone. So standardization is, we know from operations. I'm a big Toyota fan, having studied operations for so long now. There's beauty in standardization to be able to get all the things that you don't even need to think about, so that you can really focus on serving the customer and use your mental capacity for things that really matter. So, but the balance between standardization and empowerment is oftentimes not done right in companies, and oftentimes there's too much attention to rules that are all top down and not empowering workers. And empowerment can come in so many forms. So I'll give you an example of lack of empowerment. This is again from Whole Foods. I live in Cambridge. people say People's Republic of Cambridge. And, long before this was common in other places, in Cambridge, we had to bring our bags to shop. And you could buy a shopping bag from Costco or from Whole Foods or from Trader Joe's. So I bought the shopping bag from Whole Foods. And after one use, it broke. So next time I was at Whole Foods, I said, could you please replace this? Because it broke, I just bought it. And then the cashier said, I have to ask my supervisor.
Wow.
So, it's a $3 bag or $4. So there's a line of customers behind me. She can't replace that bag for me. So she's wasting her time, her supervisor's time, other customers' time for a $3 bag. If I were at Trader Joe's or at Costco or at Quick Trip, they would have said, sure, I'll just do that for you. So that type of empowerment, again, it serves the customer, it respects your time, customer's time, it enables you to be more productive and generate higher sales, and it's great for the company too. So the second choice is the combination of standardization with empowerment, the third is cross-training, and the final one, which is my favorite operational choice. All of these companies, you go into Trader Joe's, you might not see so many different products, but you will see a lot of people. Well, you used to, when you used to go shopping.
Pre-COVID, right?
We'll get to the COVID. So because these companies tend to staff their environments with more hours of labor than the expected workload. Why do they do that? Because they know that there's going to be variation in customer demand. They want to be able to serve their customers very well. And why do they do that? Because they know that they need their employees to have enough time to get all the work done so that they can serve the customer and they don't make mistakes. They do this so that they can better hire people. They do this so that people are not burned. I remember Quick Trip CEO, when I asked them, this convenience store chain with gas stations, they have in every market that they operate, they have 20% or more employees who are called relief employees. They don't report to any store. They are relief workers who just go to a store that needs help. And I said, how can you afford to do this? Like, how can you afford to have so many more people than you need? And he said, don't call me a jerk, but if understaffing, if it's something that hurts my customers and it hurts my employees, why on earth would I be understaffed? And then I'm thinking of my border study and all these other things. Most companies are understaffed. So the operate with Slack is the final choice. But I will say, you can't operate with Slack if you have slackers. So these choices require high expectations, a capable and motivated workforce, and that's why these companies invest in their workers. And if we come back to your first question, Rita, why don't we see more good jobs companies? Because you have to get the system right. It's not just about, hiring the right people, training them, paying them well. You have to set them up for success through these operational choices that depend on each other and that depend on competent and motivated workers. And oftentimes we have trouble thinking in systems and acting in systems. I was doing a workshop with a huge retailer a couple months ago, and we're going through one of the case studies, Mercadona. And Mercadona is a Spanish supermarket chain. They're Spain's largest supermarket chain, and they're fantastic. They compete on the basis of low prices. We're doing the Mercadona case, and we came to talk about empowerment. So I said, so how does Mercadona empower their workers? And we talked about how, they can solve customer problems, like what I talked about before. They can order merchandise. They can decide whether they should open another cash register or not based on customer demand. So we talked about all these things about empowerment. And one of the participants raised his hand and he said, we empowered our workers before. We lost tens of millions of dollars. And he also, this was a person from finance actually, he also talked about how, we staffed our stores with more people and it didn't produce any more sales. And he's right. If you think of empowerment in isolation, if all you do is empower your workers, but you haven't set them up for success so that they make the right decisions, or you haven't invested in them, you haven't hired the right people, of course empowerment doesn't work. right? So we have to be able to understand the system's point of view to be able to implement this. And that's where we've been facing the biggest challenges.
Well, and I think that's one of the most common misconceptions I read about your work, which is, oh, you know, the Fox News version is sort of, oh, pay people more and you'll be more successful. And that's not it, right? You've been saying all along, it's much more of a systemic approach. So let's talk about your institute, because that's one of the newer things you're working on and maybe part of the solution.
Yeah, so I started the Institute, we are in our third year. After my book came out in 2014, the first a year and a half or so, it was quiet. And then I started getting phone calls from CEOs of large companies, like even Walmart. And I wasn't very nice to Walmart in my book. And I've spent time with them, and some of them asked me, could you help us? And my response oftentimes was, well, I have a job, I'm not a consultant, I have 4 kids, like I can't. And then one day I was having a conversation with, I think you know him, Roger Martin.
Oh, sure.
So he was in our house, and I was a Martin Prosperity Institute fellow. And I told him, I said, you know, I just got off the phone with this guy. And when I said who he was, and he said, wow, what did he want? And I said, he asked me and if I would work with them. And he said, what did you say? I said, no. And he said, that's the stupidest response you could have given him. He said, if you really want to make a difference, you have to work with companies. And then I said, well, I will if you help me. So he's the chair of our Good Jobs Institute. We started this together. And at the time I had 1 star student, and Sarah Kallick. And I said, Sarah, she had an offer from a company. I said, Sarah, would you join me? I said, I don't quite know what I'm going to do yet. But I do want to, affect companies and implement the good job strategy. And she said, yes. So we started this a little bit more than 3 years ago. And our mission is to help companies thrive by creating good jobs. And our theory of change is that if we can produce a few success stories of companies that have gone from bad jobs to good jobs, then we can convince more people and more companies to change. So we work directly with companies. We offer them workshops or thought leadership. And that's what we have been doing. And I will say I learned more, I think, in the last 3 years than I have had in my whole research career, because you also generate some empathy when you work with companies and you realize these things are harder than, just talking about them.
Sure, of course. Well, and I think that's great. And you've got an index now, right? The Good Jobs Index that you've been working on?
Yeah, so we have been flirting with this. We have a Good Jobs Index, Good Jobs Score, which, in fact, yesterday we were on the phone with this private equity company. I know they have a bad name, but this is like very good people, and they want to have a fund around good jobs. So we're trying to figure out if there are ways to work together. Yeah, and there are some advantages to private equity. I'm not naive, like I realize all the disadvantages, but one of the advantages is that you can take something for 4, 5, 6 years, keep the same management team and implement change. Because one of the barriers that we have found is executive leadership turnover is also very high. So you start something like this and the CEO leaves or the COO leaves, and then the new person has their own, thing. So we're thinking about maybe co-branding this. We don't know quite yet, but this, the Good Jobs Index or Good Jobs Score was, can we identify from publicly available data which companies are implementing the good job strategy and which ones are not. So we did this in the food retail space. So we looked at the public companies in that space, and we look at 3 different things, because the good job strategy, again, it's not just about workers, it's also about customers and productivity. So we get customer data, employee data, and productivity data, and we put them together into a score and then rank companies. So we haven't institutionalized that because the audience for that really is investors. And we have decided that we're going to have company executives as their primary audience and really change them. But it is something that's out there.
That's great. So a couple of questions have come in about whether this applies to manufacturers.
That's a fantastic question. And being a student of operations management, of course, where I first learned about good jobs was through the study of Toyota. And if you study operations, you can't help but learn about the difference between the old GM or old Ford way of operating factories with very high turnover, low wages, and in a whole system designed around high turnover and employees who are interchangeable parts.
Right. Well, it's all about bad robots, basically. It's people as bad robots.
Exactly. I mean, Henry Ford had this very famous saying. He said, "Why do I need to hire a whole person when all I need is a pair of hands?" Right. So that was what auto manufacturing was in the United States. And then decades later came Toyota, and Toyota showed us that using people as interchangeable parts is not the best way to make cars. In fact, we can make higher quality and lower cost cars if we invest in a system, and that system is very much like the good job strategy. I mean, Toyota, when you look at Focus and Simplify, they have fewer parts. They don't have as much variety as some other companies. Combination of standardization and empowerment comes from the Toyota line. I mean, their workers are empowered to pull the end on cord to identify problems, surface problems, and be part of improvement. Cross-training, they move around every few hours, and then operate with Slack. There's always the wrong impression that lean is lean when it comes to workers. But Toyota production system is anything but lean when it comes to workers. For every 4 assembly line workers, there's a team leader, then there's a group leader. Like, they have Slack built into their system. So many of the principles of the good job strategy comes from manufacturing. And the first evidence of this is from manufacturing. And my hope is that, the service industry now is like where manufacturing was maybe 100 years ago. 100 years ago, manufacturing jobs were very dangerous jobs. They were low-wage jobs, bad working conditions, and super high turnover. And then that shifted quite a bit, at least in certain industries. Now the service jobs are the low-wage jobs, oftentimes occupied by minorities or immigrants or women, and they are high turnover jobs. But just like in manufacturing, we're seeing that there are some companies who offer much better jobs and much better systems and really thrive. So I'm hoping that if we could see a transition in manufacturing, why not in services? Like, why can't we see it in services?
Well, and I think we're still operating on a lot of myths in those kinds of industries. So let's turn now to the current situation, the COVID situation. Okay. You've got a great Harvard Business Review article coming out on how, coming out of this, we could rebuild with good jobs. We could really use this crisis for good in terms of the design of jobs, and maybe speculate a little bit about what you think it'll take. Because we've also had a couple of questions about, is it government that's going to enforce this? Do we need an institutional change of some kind, or is there a different path forward?
Yeah, and I can start with the COVID situation first, and then move on to what kind of, because I think, so I'll go to the next one next. But COVID-19, so many businesses have closed. Some of them have experienced amazingly low sales. Retail just came out with 16% lower sales in April than before. Even those that remained open have had their profit margins shrunk because of all the investments that they had to make in keeping workers and customers safe. So many of these companies will have to restart, but also rebuild, because things will be different. And the point of view that I bring is that when they rebuild, they should rebuild based on good jobs. And the reason is their system, in many service settings at least, the system was broken already, right? It's not like the companies were doing so well before, and now things have gotten worse. No, their system was broken already because of that laser focus on labor cost minimization. and that system, don't go back to that system, come to a new system. And this is exactly the right moment to do it, for multiple reasons. One is, from a moral perspective, for the first time, I think in a long time, all eyes are on the workers. The woman who told me we are interchangeable parts, we are throwaways, is now an essential workers, right? She's now an essential worker, and people are seeing the bad working conditions in meat plants and Amazon fulfillment centers and Whole Foods. So for the first time, we're seeing this, and perhaps customers will say, hey, I'm not going to buy from a company that treats their workers this way, especially when I can get just low prices from someplace else. So that could be one push toward good jobs. The other thing,
and that also raises the question, and one of our participants asked about, if you had some way of having a metric, a comparison.
Yep.
That consumers could readily access, right?
Yep, I think Glassdoor will be the perfect. I mean, if you want to learn about workers, Glassdoor will be the place to go look at the
Great idea.
work metrics. But the other thing is, some of the trends that were already happening in retail will accelerate. So there was already transition to e-commerce. Almost every retailer now thinks about omni-channel, and now now people's shopping habits have changed. Right? A lot more people who didn't used to buy online before are now buying online. And it's going to be, I think, the transition to online will be a lot faster, which means if you have stores, you have to provide a compelling reason for your customers to come. And that compelling reason is not going to be there if you don't have empowered, capable, competent, motivated workers.
One of the best examples of this in the last few years has been Best Buy. And I've written about, Hubert Joly inherited a company that everybody had given Best Buy up for dead. I mean, they just were e-commerce was eating their lunch and everything. And what Hubert did was, the first thing he did, which I thought was an interesting place to start as a CEO, was he spent 2 weeks actually working in the stores and listening to what people in the stores were saying. And what his insight was that these employees wanted to serve the customers well, but the way the store systems were set up, they couldn't do it, right? Yep. So they weren't being trained. They were unpredictable schedules, poor wages, the whole thing, high turnover. And so what he started to do was he said, well, I've got a physical footprint. How do I make the best of a physical footprint? But one of the big ahas was, if you've got physical plant, the only thing that will get somebody to come into that physical plant, absent other reasons, is if you've got a trained and knowledgeable workforce. And so the pillars of Best Buy's turnaround were, employees trained way ahead of customers. So they're training people right now on AI. They're training them on haptic technologies and touch screens and everything, so that when those things finally move into the consumer space, these employees will already be up that learning curve. And you're not going to ask somebody who doesn't know the answer, right? And then the other thing he did that I thought was fascinating was he said to, Sony and Apple and all those other people, well, I have 1,100 stores. What have you got? You want to be in my stores? That's fantastic. You're going to pay rent. But because the customer experience is so much better, that actually turned into a significant advantage for them. So
but without that experience, I think the mediocre retailers are not going to be able to to survive. And granted, even before COVID-19, we had 24.5 square feet of space per person in the United States, retail space, versus Europe's 4.5. We were already overstored. So there will be, we will see fewer stores going forward. And one other thing you mentioned, workers being trained ahead of customers, technology trends are going to accelerate. And adapting, scaling new technologies require capable, committed workforce. And we might see fewer workers, but we need the workers to be able to scale and adapt these technologies. And finally, I think that the other trend that I expect is that customers will want not just great interactions, but also lower prices. So one of the good jobs companies I talk about, Mercadona, the Spanish retail chain, 2008 economic crisis, 2008 to 2009, they were able to reduce their prices by 10%, which is a huge deal in the retail industry. And part of this was because of the hard work and innovative ideas that came from their front lines. So again, good jobs gives you this advantage that you can adapt to changes, reduce your prices faster than your competitors. So I think these trends, like if we don't do it now, where else? When else? And the final thing that I will say, and then I'll get to the next question, is that now the investor expectations may also be changing. Right? Amazon said next quarter we're going to spend $4 billion into PP, like we won't be making money. It might be unreasonable for many investors to expect short-term returns. So this is the time to say, you know what, I'm going to rebuild. And the low demand gives you the opportunity to experiment with things, tinker with operational changes, and see how you create the system together. So I think this is a moment where the world needs more jobs, customers need better service and lower prices, and we need, courageous leaders who will come out and say, this is what I'm going to do. And maybe, just maybe, they will start rebuilding trust in business, because we need capitalism to thrive.
We do. And Rebecca Henderson was on one of our firesides a little while ago, and she talks about
her work.
Yeah, she's great. She mentioned you as well, and she talks about reimagining capitalism. And I'm reminded of, there was a group called the Council for Economic Development that was formed of leading business people. Maybe you know about them after World War II.
Yep. I was just reading about that.
Were you?
Yeah.
So I've been doing a lot of work in this area as well. And they we sort of won the war, but oh my God, there are 30 million people who are now going to be thrust into unemployment. What is business going to do about it? And they actually forged an agreement around slightly lower corporate profits, but in exchange, powerful relationships with labor, a willingness to provide basic middle-class jobs, worker protections, healthcare, a bunch of other things. That was really part of a post-World War II compact that I think largely created the middle class in the United States and in other countries as well. They were, for example, they supported the Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild Europe. I mean, there was a lot of good that came out of that.
Yeah, and Rita, sorry, this is what you said about them is so applicable to now, right? How do we get more good jobs? Because it can't just be up to a few leaders. There are some companies that are changing. One of our proudest examples is Sam's Club, which had huge investments in worker wages, creating stable schedules, and in a very low profit margin sector, and they've been doing quite well. But it can't be just a few leaders. There needs to be policy, higher minimum wages, other policies to encourage good behavior. You mentioned in this example, worker voice, right? We need to bring worker voice into this equation. And customers need to be part of this, as somebody mentioned before. And I think business school education, we have to be part of the solution too. It's Jim Sinegal, the co-founder of Costco, who is my business hero. He comes to my class every year. And he says to my students that he said, for decades, what business schools taught students is that the only thing that mattered was shareholder value maximization. That's the only thing that mattered. That's not what you were talking about just 2 minutes ago, right? These enlightened CEOs, executives were getting together to say, look, for our country, that's not maximizing profits is not the only thing that matters.
Exactly.
How we play the game is important.
Yeah. There's a really interesting guy called Nick Hanauer who runs a website called Pitchfork Economics. And he has a very interesting, very capitalist perspective on this. He says the problem with this whole endemic bad jobs, and you said 43 million people in the US?
According to Brookings, 53 million people. Median wage $17,950.
It's incredible. But he makes a fascinating point. He said, you're impoverishing my customers. If my customers are living on the thin edge of survival, they're not eating in restaurants, they're not purchasing things at retail, they're just barely scraping by. So if you want a prosperous society for everybody, at the end of the day, it does not serve business leaders well to have impoverished customers, And so I think there's a really interesting, very capitalist argument to be made.
Absolutely.
Back to business schools for a minute. So I think we are beginning to see a turn away from that. Certainly at Columbia, we're seeing much more interest in purpose-driven organizations, social organizations. Even the MBAs are sort of saying there's more to life than this. And of course, the Business Roundtable very famously said, okay, we're actually going to look at stakeholders. So I think you may be right. We may be at a moment.
Yeah.
So take us to your
can
next.
I just say one other thing related to what you said? You said Uber Jolie, when he went to Best Buy, he spent his first 2 weeks working at the stores. So I wish, if I were the dean of a business school, I would say all my MBA students need to spend a couple of weeks working in the front lines. It doesn't matter whether you work at Target or McDonald's or Gap, it doesn't matter. But part of your education has to be working in the front lines for a couple of weeks to become better leaders in the future, to change your assumptions about workers. We started the conversation with you asking, why don't more leaders do this? To see how hardworking people are, to see how you set them up for failure, right? I have students who work in front lines and they come, and they're MIT students, right? They've graduated from MIT. They're like, I was failing in front of the customer every day because I didn't have the right system. I didn't know about the products. The price changed, but I wasn't made aware of the price change. So it would be fabulous if we could encourage more MBA students to work in the front lines.
That's a great suggestion. And we could do that tomorrow and it wouldn't even be expensive.
Yes.
So let's talk about your HBR article, because I love the optimistic and positive note that you strike there.
Yes, so the HBR article is, we've already talked about this, that this is the time to rebuild. This is the time to rebuild. If not now, then when? And if you don't do it from a competitive point of view, you might not be around any longer.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and there was a really interesting piece in the New York Times this past week, I think, and the headline was something like "McDonald's workers in Denmark feel sorry for us."
Yes, I think it was a Nicholas Kristof piece.
Okay.
And I think so, yeah, because he spoke to, apparently, and I'm not, I haven't done comparative studies of United States versus other countries, but apparently the prices at Denmark are only slightly higher, not even like very slightly higher. But the workers there make decent wages and they can afford to buy a home, live comfortably. And that is the way it should be. And yeah, they were pitying US workers. I think McDonald's is an interesting one because a lot of people in our generation associate McDonald's as a starter job. Oh, that's where I worked when I was in high school, right? Like that was where I started. They used to be starter jobs 20, 30 years ago. They are no longer starter jobs. So people who work at McDonald's, people who work at the Gap, at Target, at Walmart, they are not there for pocket money. They are there for their livelihoods. And we have to make these jobs middle-class jobs if we want to have a thriving economy where we cannot, say, if we want to increase consumption of services and products, we need to raise up these jobs to become middle-class jobs, because I don't see how else we are going to create a more sustainable society. And one of the things that drive me crazy is that we should just train workers to get to higher skill jobs, right?
Upskilling thing, yeah.
Upskilling, all the foundations, they're like, how do we upskill? How do we upskill? I'm like, okay, I'm looking at 4.7 million tech jobs versus 42 million service jobs. So where are you going to upskill people to? Or there are 9 million manufacturing jobs. Like, where will you put those 40 million people? You're just going to give up on them? No, they're not. And they are not low-skill jobs. You have to change the job design so that they could support middle class, just like Costco or Quick Trip or Mercadona. So I think the reason that I'm optimistic is that we have a solution. We know how to get there. We need more demand from customers. We need
more awareness.
Smarter, more demand for, like, I was on a panel a few years ago with the CEO of a burrito chain. And he said, my customers care a lot more about how my chickens are treated than how the workers are treated. Like they want free, they care so much, animal rights people. He's like, but we had people who lived in cars before we raised wages. Like, I wish there was more pull from my customers and them voting with their wallets and saying, I'm gonna buy from good jobs companies, just like how I would buy from companies that treat the environment right.
So we could make that happen out of this rebound, right? If enough voices were raised, we could make that.
So that's why I'm optimistic. And if I'm not optimistic, it will be hard for me to motivate myself to work.
Absolutely. So, I think that's a great to do for the people that are our listeners. Are there any more kind of things that I, as a person, without being a CEO or a head of a government or something, are there any other things that I could do that would contribute to this cause?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do is to be more conscious shoppers and buy from places that offer good jobs, especially because you don't have to pay more. You can find just as low prices. That's the easiest thing to do. I tell my students that to also, when they consider where they're going to work, not to work with companies who are not aligned with their values. Because I tell them, look, you don't take your talent, your hard work, competence, your network to a company whose values you don't agree with. Because luckily, people who have a certain level of education can choose. So choose where to place your talent and choose with your values. Those are probably the things that we could do as individuals. And if you are working for one of those organizations, try to advocate for good jobs. And with numbers, and with the financial competitive and then the moral case too.
Well, but I think the most fascinating thing about your research, and we'll have to wrap it up in just a minute, but to me what just struck such a chord when I first ran across your research, and I think I was like reaching out to you when the book came out, and I was like, I've got to talk to you. It's so important. But the fact that together with Jeff and a bunch of others, you can actually find the performance implications. It's not that this is just a feel good, nice to do, bleeding heart kind of thing to do. It actually makes a big difference in terms of performance. And I think that's really where your work is so different from a lot of other kind of advocates for this, in that it really makes a very compelling case for that.
At the end of the semester, I get emails from students and they say, I came skeptical. And then at the end of the term, I was sold. Because they see it one after another in different industries, the performance. And, I teach business school students, but there's enough evidence that this is profitable.
And a really, it's profitable as well as a great thing to do humanly, and how often do you get that combination? It doesn't often happen.
Yeah. And Rita, I want to thank you because ever since we met, you have been so supportive of this work. You always talk about this. You give the opportunity to spread this around. So I want to thank you for your support.
I'm a huge believer, and if there's anything I can do, you know where to find me. So this hour has just flown by, and I want to really thank you. I know with 4 kids at home and all that implies, you're probably pretty busy. So I appreciate you taking the hour. And where can people go to learn more?
They can go to goodjobsinstitute.org. They don't need to buy my book. I'm an operations professor, not a marketing one. We have so much information about the good job strategy. There are videos, there are insights. So go to goodjobsinstitute.org for more information.
For anybody who wants to be an advocate, that's where they could start.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care.